Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are listening from. It's the return of the Pulse Pod with me, Jack, and tonight I have got Robbie Stelling with me, previously of the Hartlepool Mail, but now newly minted editor of his own publication, The Monkey's Uncle. Hello, Robbie, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Jack. It's great to be back in amongst it as far as pools and pools coverage are concerned, and it's great to chat to you today.
Wonderful stuff. And since the last time I recorded, it was the beginning of May when we just come off the back of a season where we fell slightly under par. I think it's fair to say, finishing ninth in the league and quite a way off the playoffs, to be fair. And it's been a while since you've been on, Robbie. So just firstly on last season, before we move on to more positive developments, it did feel a little as though we went under par. And in the end, missing out on the top seven, you would have to suggest is a bit of a disappointment.
I think for Hartlepool United, Jack, the aim at the start of every National League season has to be at minimum playoffs. I mean, albeit last season there were some very strong teams in the division. Obviously, York and Rochdale both finished with more than 100 points, had that unbelievable title race, but Boreham Wood were really, really strong under Luke Garrard. Carlisle, of course, with all their financial riches as well. Scunthorpe had an excellent season under Andy Butler, didn't they? There were lots of strong teams in that division, but Hartlepool United, given their size, their stature, their history, and of course their support, I think have to be at the very, very minimum aiming for a top seven finish. Obviously, the summer before last season, there was all sorts of off-field machinations, which I certainly don't think helped, but there was plenty of optimism when the campaign began. Started well enough, didn't they, under Simon Grayson? But ultimately, I think a lack of threat in the final third, a lack of a natural goal scorer. Alex Reid, I think, could have been that, scored 12 goals in the end, and has obviously since signed for Barrow, having been released by Pools last month. But for whatever reason, it didn't quite work out. I think in part there were times when Reid maybe could have done a little bit more, led the line a little bit better, but he was understandably frustrated, I think, as well, because Pools, I think sometimes they were too negative. I think a lot of the time they were too pedestrian, certainly not adventurous enough in how they set up, how they approached games, and how they used the ball as well. Struggles at home, of course, that's something that if Hartlepool United are going to be successful next season, they need to rectify. You would imagine they will go into the new campaign riding a bit of a wave of momentum. It's important that Pools capitalise on that and build on that because we know that Victoria Park can be a really great place for the home team to play. But when things aren't going quite as well, it can also be a really difficult place for Pools to play. And we saw that at times last season as well. And a lack of consistency. It was frustrating, wasn't it? Because there were times when Pools produced some really good performances. They beat Rochdale in December. They obviously had that memorable win over Carlisle as well. But there were some really low points as well. And I think in particular, you look at when Pools had the chance to climb into the top seven. I think on multiple occasions there were games where 3 points would have taken them into the playoff places, but for whatever reason they weren't able to get over the line. Whether it was a lack of quality, a lack of confidence, a lack of consistency, or more likely a combination of all three, it was in the end a season that rather petered out. We of course had that nightmarish 7-0 defeat to Wealdstone, and then Pools were well beaten by Boreham Wood as well. Nicky Featherstone, of course, was the man in charge, didn't do quite enough in the end to keep his job. I mean, I spoke to him for my new website, The Monkey's Uncle, last week. He has been offered a role to remain at Victoria Park, but I think as of yet, his Pool's future remains up in the air. I don't think too many fans would have been too surprised by the decision to look in a different direction. It was a frustrating season, Jack, but I think in the end it will probably be a season that will be remembered more for what happened off the pitch than on it. And Pools fans will hopefully look back on it as a season where there was some welcome change in terms of the ownership. Raj Singh obviously selling the club to Landon Smith. And of course, all Pools fans are now hoping that they're going to be able to progress and hopefully return to the Football League under the American.
Absolutely. And given the off season, we've spoken about what happened off the field in the season just gone, but off the field in the closed season, we've seen a few changes around. Obviously, Bromby and partners were appointed to oversee something of a changeover in a few different roles. at the club, and one of them turned out to be the manager in the end. You mentioned there Nicky
Yeah.
Featherstone departing, and Lee Clark was the name that came in after strong links with Lee Cattermole as well, who's ended up at Gateshead since then. So do you think, firstly, do you think Nicky Featherstone should have been given another year potentially, or do you reckon he was unlucky to receive his marching orders, if you like? Or, to be fair, I think his contract simply wasn't renewed, wasn't it? He was on to the end of the season, so it wasn't really a sacking as such. It was just a mutual parting, shall we say, for the time being. And then secondly, do you think that Lee Clark is the man to produce the results to take Hartlepool, if not winning the league, then certainly making a good crack at the playoffs?
Well, it's an interesting one, Jack. I mean, I was looking at the betting odds earlier this afternoon. I think pools are the 5-2 second favourites at the moment. Of course, a
Yep.
lot can change, and we won't really know exactly where they are until the campaign kicks off properly in August. Look, Nicky Featherstone is someone that I like. I have a huge amount of respect for. Obviously, has given the club really impressive service, the third highest appearance maker of all time. Wasn't everybody's cup of tea as a player, of course, but I think it's telling that pretty much every manager who he played under made him an integral part of their side. He captained the team on numerous occasions. He was part of the team that won promotion in 2021 as well and was a real regular under Dave Challoner. Of course, he was also part of the team that got relegated in 2023, and it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows as far as Nicky Featherstone, the player, is concerned. Look, I think he was unlucky to a degree. I think if you look at his win record, over 40%, there were some really good performances, as we've said. I think there were positives to take from Featherstone's tenure. In many ways, I felt the manager's job came a little bit too early for him. We probably always would have thought that Nicky Featherstone, given his links to the club, would have been a Hartlepool United manager at some stage in his career. But in many ways, he was sort of thrust into it because of the fact that Simon Grayson was relatively unexpectedly sacked in October. And then he did so well, other than that defeat to Gainsborough Trinity in the FA Cup fourth qualifying round replay. He did so well during his spell in caretaker charge. And I think also Pools maybe explored other targets that probably didn't quite come off. I think it probably made sense at the time to give him the job on a permanent or, as you say, semi-permanent basis until the end of the season. And I think when Landon Smith took over from Raj Singh, it probably made sense as well to stick with Featherstone until the end of the season. Look, I think what Nicky would say is that he inherited a squad of players assembled by Simon Grayson, who's more renowned for being pragmatic than for being committed to sort of attacking possession based football. But I still think that there were understandable frustrations from the fan base. Pools had some quality in their squad, and I don't think they always failed to get to maximise that. I mean, we spoke already about Alex Reid. We know what he can do at this level because he had a really successful spell with Wealdstone the campaign prior. But we didn't often see him in positions where I felt he could really hurt defences. And I think that was in part due to the way that Pools set up, both tactically and in terms of the team selection. Featherstone, of course, notoriously reluctant to play with two strikers. I think in the end, it probably became an inevitability that he would not be given the chance to lead the team into the new campaign. I think as much as anything, he hadn't really won over the fan base, and I think you could tell that there were some really disappointing results towards the end of the campaign. I would love to see Nicky remain at the club in some capacity, but whether that's going to happen remains to be seen. I think Nicky certainly sees himself as a first team coach and probably a manager in the future as well. So if that opportunity at Hartlepool United isn't available to him in the immediate future, he might well look elsewhere. But of course, a lot will depend on what else potentially comes up. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I'd certainly be really pleased if he were to return to Victoria Park in some capacity next season. I think, though, his departure as manager became inevitable. Lee Clark, I was surprised. I have to say, he wouldn't have been my first choice. I don't think he would have been the first choice of many Hartlepool United fans. And as you say, it looked for all the world like Pools was set on a deal for Lee Cattermole, a very different profile of manager, given the fact that he hasn't taken charge of a senior men's first team or hadn't taken charge of a senior men's first team prior to his appointment at Gateshead. So I was a little bit surprised, I think, to see Pools go in such a different direction. Look, Lee Clark's managerial record recently is a little bit checkered, and he's sort of earned a bit of a reputation as a firefighter, hasn't he? He's someone who comes in, you look at what he's done at Rotherham, at Bury, at Blythe Spartans, at Kilmarnock, plenty of clubs, Blackpool as well, where he's taken over, where the club is in a really perilous position, often both on the pitch and off it. I think if you were to speak to people at Rotherham, they would speak pretty highly of him, albeit only one win in 9 games. But I think there were plenty of people at the New York Stadium who would have liked to keep him in, certainly in some capacity, for the upcoming campaign. So in that sense, it represents an interesting bit of business for Hartlepool United. Earlier on in his managerial career, he had a lot of success, didn't he? He was manager of Huddersfield. That was his first job in senior management. He led them to back-to-back League One playoff campaigns. So clearly, he is capable of taking charge of a team that is pushing at the right end of the table. The one thing you would say about Lee Clark is he knows the area incredibly well. Obviously, he's spoken about in the past the links to his club through his brother-in-law, had a really distinguished playing career as well with Newcastle United. So he knows the Northeast inside and out. He knows the unique footballing culture that associates with the Northeast and will probably understand the demands and expectations of the Hartlepool United supporters as well. By all accounts, he wants to play an energetic, pressing, exciting, forward-thinking brand of football. I think that should really suit Hartlepool United as well. And the recruitment, which will of course be so significant into whether Clark succeeds or fails next season, has been really promising. And I think I get the sense that he's going to work with a really competitive budget. That, of course, we know that money isn't everything, but it certainly helps, especially given the competitive nature of the National League. I'm positive about the Lee Clark appointment, without a doubt. I've exchanged a few messages with him here and there. I think he speaks really well as well. And then it's an exciting time for Pools fans, isn't it? I think if Clark and Pools can get off to a good start, then that could be so crucial. Obviously, Pools started the season well last year, but they weren't able to maintain that. This season does feel, or next season, the coming season, feels a little bit different in terms of the energy around the place, the hope, the optimism, and the belief of the fan base. So if Clark can get the Pool supporters behind him by starting well, by playing an exciting, attacking brand of football, then I think there's real opportunity both for him and for Hartlepool United next season.
Indeed, it seems that we do that every year, particularly in the National League, whereby we start very well in August and then something happens around the bank holiday, which basically curtails our season and we go into a spiral and then the manager gets sacked. So hopefully, given the new era around the place, it won't be the same this time. And we have something of a long-term appointment in Lee Clark. And as you say, he does speak very well. So we'll have to see how he does. But looking at the signings he's made so far, there was a bit of a wait in terms of the first signing coming through the door. But then when John Hugel signed, we then had three more in quick succession. Given the names that have come through the door, so we have got Hugel firstly, we've got Jack Nolan, we've got Brooklyn Ilunga, and we've got Corey McKeown from Spennymoor. Is there any one of those four that stands out in particular for yourself?
Well, I think like a lot of Pools fans, Jack Nolan is probably going to be the
Yeah.
signing that stands out there. Feels to me like a real statement of intent. He obviously had a really successful individual season with a Morecambe side who really struggled last season. He scored 19 goals in 40 games, scored against Pools, and I think was probably one of the National League's hottest properties when it was announced that he was going to be leaving Morecambe. It sounds like Pools had to fend off really, really strong competition for his signature. I spoke to Rob Law last week, and from what I understand, the club really pulled out all the stops to sign Jack Nolan, and that is really positive for a whole host of reasons. I would imagine he had plenty of clubs to choose from. It suggests that the Hartlepool United project, Lee Clark's vision, and of course the budget that Pools are working with are all really positive, and we're able to convince Nolan that rather than bide his time and wait to see what other offers became available to him, he was determined to commit his future to Hartlepool United relatively early on in the summer. That's a hugely positive signing. Pools, of course, struggled for creativity, for flair, for attacking intent, for running power for large parts in last season. It's definitely important that they try to rectify that. And there were often times last year when I felt like even some of the more drab and dour games, which you're going to get at times in the National League,
of
They
course.
needed a bit of magic, someone to come and unlock the door, play a killer pass, conjure something up out of nothing. They didn't have too many players within their squad capable of doing that. I think Jack Nolan is very much a player who will be able to do that. I think also when it comes to the rest of the summer, I think other players, interested players, will look at the fact that someone like Jack Nolan, with his pedigree and the season that he's just had, has decided to come and sign for Hartlepool United. That would make me, if I'm a player, think this is a club to be reckoned with. These guys are serious about what they're doing. So you might hope that that has a bit of a knock on effect in terms of their business as well. But I'm pleased with all the signings. Jordan Hugo, obviously vastly experienced. I wouldn't expect him to be someone who starts regularly, but obviously has played under Lee Clark, albeit he was injured for large parts of Clark's brief stint at Rotherham. But we know all about his experience, his power, his leadership. Scored 4 goals in 8 games, including that memorable strike that effectively sealed the great escape from relegation under Ronnie Moore. A lot of time has passed since then, but he's certainly an interesting addition. Probably a player who will be important on the pitch, but also off the pitch as well in terms of what he can offer to the dressing room. Corey McKeown, I'm pleased to see that again. That's a signing that has Lee Clark's fingerprints all over it. Of course, they work together at Blythe. Again, is he going to be someone who necessarily comes in and immediately lights up the National League or starts every game? Well, that might well depend on what business pools do between now and the beginning of the season. But he's a relatively young player, renowned for his ball carrying and creativity. And I think again that should excite fans. Hartlepool United supporters want to see a sort of bums off seats type player, and by all accounts, McKeown is someone like that. And Brooklyn Alunga, not a player that I really know lots about, but someone who's been part of a very successful Bromley side under Andy Woodman. Sounds like he's going to be able to add versatility to the Pools squad. That's obviously massively important, especially when you consider the rigorous demands of the relentless National League. I sometimes think you can prioritize versatility over other things too much. You don't necessarily want to have 11 or 12 jack of all trades. You want players to be able to specialize in a position, make it their own, and be among the best players in the National League at their role. But it is also important to have that versatility. And Alunga, still a young player, hopefully will continue to grow into his role and find out the player that he wants to be. But certainly an interesting bit of business. Played fairly regularly for Bromley, didn't he? That Bromley side who were crowned League Two champions unexpectedly, really had a fantastic campaign. I think of his 43 or 44 appearances, sorry, about 39 of them came as a substitute. So he certainly wasn't a regular starter, but he was an important member of their squad. Again, a bit of an unknown entity, but given his background and his pedigree, given his experience for someone of a relatively young age. I think he's 22 and he's made more than 100 appearances across the National League and Football League. That would seem to be a promising bit of business. A really encouraging start. I think probably more encouraging than a lot of Pools fans, even the more optimistic ones, would have hoped for. Plenty of work to be done. Pools, of course, released 13 players in May, so they have got a lot of work to do in terms of building that squad and assembling that squad. But the early signs, very good indeed.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about the ones that were released. There were a couple of them that were kept, and I say a couple because the return list wasn't very big, was it? There was
Yeah.
quite the exodus. As I think Pulse fans sort of wanted that sort of level, but I don't think they actually expected that many players to go. You look at the likes of Alex Reid, for example, who left, which, to be fair, I was very surprised with, given he is something of a commodity. He's proven in the National League, and I am surprised that they let him go. Clearly, they have ideas on who they want to bring in. But I think the main thing that we've seen so far is the fact that that defensive unit has basically stayed intact. The ones that we have on a permanent contract anyway, the likes of Cam John, of course, on loan. So he went back and was then released by York, and we still haven't signed him. So if Chris Beach happens to be listening at any point in this podcast, if we could get him back, that'd be delightful. But not only that, the fact that the keeping position is once again somewhat vacant. Adam Smith has signed as player coach once again. It'll be similar to last season. You would like to think they'll be looking at a number one to bring in for him to coach. The likes of Harrison Mail has been mooted. He was released by York as well as Cameron John at the end of the season. There are a couple of other keeper names flying about. But it's interesting to note that the recruitment that's happened so far has been all forward and midfield based. There's not been anything really on the defensive side as of yet. And what do you think the priority should be? I know there'll be multiple priorities currently, but if you wanted to pick a position that you would focus on first from this point, what would it be?
Well, I think the position they will be focusing on is probably a striker. I was a bit surprised that they decided to let Alex Reed go because I still think he had something to offer. I would very much agree with what you say, Jack. I think he is someone who can score goals at National League level, albeit we didn't see it as often as we might have liked last season. Obviously, pools have been heavily linked with Will Harris. He scored 25 goals in 46 games last season. I understand that that is a deal that pools are really keen on doing, but they're going to face fairly stiff competition, I think, from a whole host of rivals. And of course, Halifax themselves, they're determined to keep hold of their talisman. But I don't think pools would have let Alex Reed go unless they felt they were going to go and sign a 20 goal a season striker. Again, a bit like Jack Nolan, someone who's going to serve as a real statement of intent and who's going to be a Manny Disarue type of player who is capable of scoring on a consistent basis, but also capable of leading the line effectively. And if you look at Will Harris in terms of his profile, he is absolutely that man. But I think also their other priority, you alluded to it, Jack, has to be the goalkeeper. Pools used four different goalkeepers last season, albeit not necessarily by design. Harvey Cartwright was doing so well, wasn't he? 7 clean sheets in 13 games prior to his untimely injury. George Evans, likewise, was really impressive after arriving on loan from Millwall. I think Pools had just extended his loan deal, hadn't they, when Stephen Bender got injured at Millwall, which meant that he ended up getting recalled. Inevitably, that is the risk you take when you make loan signings, especially in that goalkeeping department. Sometimes if it's an outfielder, you're better placed to absorb that loss. Even if you don't have a specialist in that position, you might have someone like a Brooklyn Alunga who can play in multiple different positions and is therefore able to provide cover, and you don't necessarily have to rush into signing a replacement. But the goalkeeping position tends to be very precarious. Adam Smith, of course, featured sparingly last season. I don't think Pools will see him as a viable option as a first choice. Did well enough, didn't he, when he first got his chance a couple of seasons ago, but made a number of high-profile errors towards the back end of his first season, and I think only made 3 appearances last year. Certainly has an important role to play as a goalkeeping coach, and of course there's young Harry Conyard as well, who signed a professional deal, but you'd be very surprised were he to be genuinely in the first team picture. At the time, I felt like Nick Hayes was going to be a really good signing, given his experience. Reached the playoff final with Songhay Moors and Southend. Played 26 times for Barnet the year that they won the league so comprehensively, but never really settled. I felt he always looked very, very nervous, particularly when coming for crosses, and of course struggled with his distribution too. So I would imagine that a goalkeeper is going to be absolutely at the top of Hartlepool United's priority list. I spoke to Chris Beach and Chris Maxwell, of course, a former goalkeeper himself, about that. And they told me, yes, we are looking for a new number one goalkeeper. Yes, we are confident that the hunt is progressing. Look, goalkeepers, there aren't as many of them as there are of outfield players. It often tends to be a bit of a drawn out search. You mentioned Harrison Mayle. That's a really interesting one. He's obviously done incredibly well at York. I worry about his size some of the time. I think you look at how Pools look to exploit that when they played York last season under Nicky Featherstone. Those balls into the box, he really, really struggled to deal with those. Pools have got big, capable central defenders, as you've mentioned, in Maxime Coogan and Reece McNally. I would think they would look to add at least one more in that department, with Jack Hunter, of course, able to play there as well, did so effectively last season. But I have concerns. I mean, Harrison Mayle is an excellent shot stopper. He's very, very competent with the ball at his feet as well, and has been part of a really successful York side. But I do have concerns about his size and stature. I think that teams would potentially be able to exploit that. So if you do sign someone like a Harrison Mayle, I think you need to be prepared for that. You need to have a plan. Look, if teams are going to launch long balls into your area and swing balls under his bar, then I think you're going to have to accept that because of his size, there are going to be issues potentially. And I think you have to balance whether the the payoff, as it were, in terms of his distribution and his shot stopping prowess are worth the slight risks that you're going to take in that regard. I think it's important for Hartlepool United that they are able to get a goalkeeper who's going to come in and play for the majority, if not all, of the season. The last 2 years, I think Pool's had three goalkeepers in the first season back in the National League, and then they had four the following campaign as well. It's important that we have a solid, reliable first choice goalkeeper. Inevitably, injuries are part of football. You need a bit of luck as well. Harvey Cartwright probably would have been that man, certainly for the first 6 months of the campaign, had he not got injured when he did against Carlisle in October. But that's something that Pools will be looking for. I would imagine that that will be a priority. In terms of other positions, they obviously need a left back. You've mentioned Cam John. I would have imagined that if they were going to get that deal done, it might have already happened. I would like to think that it's a deal that Pools will be pushing for, albeit there are some suggestions he is keen on a move back down south. They definitely need more creativity in midfield as well. They've got a good spine with players like Jack Hunter and Nathan Sheron and Jamie Miley, of course, who can be pretty creative and progressive with his passing. But I think absolutely they need a little bit more creativity. Players who are able to take the ball, look forward, find important forward passes, be really progressive, be forward thinking, be able to take risks in possession as well. Other areas, of course, to strengthen, and you do want to flesh out that squad. That's going to be important as well if Pools are to compete over a 46 game season. Lots of work to do, as we've said, but I think striker and goalkeeper, those are probably going to be two positions that are going to be fundamental to Hartlepool United's success next season.
Yes, and another thing that has literally just been announced because we are recording this on Wednesday evening. And by the way, when the club inevitably announce five signings or something tomorrow night, obviously there is a reason why we haven't covered them. We don't know about them. So when this goes out, probably on Friday, and there's been another five players since this was recorded, please forgive us. But in terms of the news that has flashed up as we started recording this, Brian Honour is back at the club as the new matchday ambassador, which involves the likes of hospitality, greeting people as well, and telling a few of his stories, which, if you haven't heard them on this podcast, we did a special with him last year. So you can go and find those on the usual platforms. But it's just another example, Robbie, of how since Landon Smith has come into the club, it just seems like a completely different place given the steps that they've taken. There's communication with the fans. We look at one of the first things the club did this in the off season was revamp the pitch, which it looks as though it's coming on quite well in the pictures that we've seen. And now a match day ambassador, which is, it's a role that maybe not everybody has. Most clubs, I would suggest, do it with a club legend of some description, but it just makes the match day experience a lot better, which is something that he's spoken about in the past as well.
I think match day experience in general, Jack, there's been a lot of work to do. Last season, there was certainly a sense that, especially under Raj Singh, obviously I've had my own personal issues with him. I certainly recognise some of the good that he's done for the club, especially in terms of when he stepped in to stave off that threat of administration and even possibly worse. And obviously left the club with it on a firmer financial footing than he found it. But in terms of match day experience, I think they left a lot to be desired. Part of that, I think, was because towards the end of Singh's tenure, it felt a bit like us against them in terms of seeing the powers that be against the Hartlepool United fan base. And that just cannot be right, especially for a club like Pools, which is very much the heartbeat of the town with one of the best and most colourful and most passionate and largest fan bases in the National League as well. So plenty of work to do there. And I think that moves like this move with Brian Honour will certainly help to improve the matchday experience and continue to bridge the gap between the club, the ownership, and the fan base, because towards the ends of Singh's tenure, there was almost unparalleled levels of division and disaffection, and that was really concerning. It obviously led to a relatively alarming or extremely alarming drop-off in home attendances. I would imagine that come August, come that first competitive game of the new National League season, that first competitive home game, you would imagine that Victoria Park is going to be absolutely bouncing. And I think Landon Smith, as well as the team that he's got around him, deserve real credit for working hard to reconnect with the club, reconnect with the fan base. I mean, my dad, Jeff Stelling, he's returned to his role as honorary president. He's going to be up in the Northeast doing some work with the club in the next couple of weeks. Savannah Marshall's taken on an ambassadorial role as well. Little things as well, or not little things, but Smith's willingness to communicate with the press, the fact that he's written several open letters to the fan base, the fact that on a day like today, I've just had the chance to go and speak to Chris Maxwell and Chris Beach. All of these things help the club re-engage and reconnect with the fan base. Hartlepool United is nothing without its fan base. I think Landon Smith recognises that the supporters are the beating heart and the soul of this great club. Obviously, results on the pitch will do a lot to make sure it feels like everyone is pulling in the same direction. But I think Landon Smith, with all of the hard work that he's done both on and off the pitch and around the ground as well, is taking significant strides in the right direction to ensure that when the season does get underway, 100% of Hartlepool United fans are going to be right behind himself, Lee Clark, and the team. And that is absolutely crucial to any successful season. And as you say as well, Jack, I think the improvements made to the pitch are going to be massive for all sorts of reasons. But if Hartlepool United want to play an exciting, attacking, sometimes possession-based brand of football, they need to have a playing surface that allows them to do that. And I think, in fairness to Nicky Featherstone, who had understandable critics about his style of play, sometimes the pitch resembled more a quagmire than it did a football pitch. I think Dave Brown puts his heart and soul into making it the best possible playing surface, award-winning groundsman, of course, during the time that the club were in the Football League. But inevitably, budget cuts took their toll, and the pitch was starting to look in a really sorry state over the last couple of years. So delighted to see progress being made in that regard too. It feels like Landon Smith just gets it, doesn't he? Doesn't it? Inevitably, he will have things to learn. By his own admission, he's got plenty to learn about National League football, Hartlepool United, and the culture in the Northeast. He is, of course, an American, but I spoke to my dad a couple of weeks ago. He told me that even prior to his takeover of the club, he was waking up in the early hours to watch streams of the Hartlepool United matches. He really wants to learn. He really wants to get to grips with the town, the community, and the football club. I think fans see and appreciate that, and that is massively important. Of course, a stark contrast, I think, to the former ownership as well. A real sense that pools are all pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely. You mentioned there as well about the first game of the season. We haven't had the fixture release yet because for some unknown as of yet reason, because I don't think they've ever actually explained it, the fixture release date for the National League is at least 2 or 3 weeks after everyone else, which, go figure. But the fixture release date this year is on Friday, the 10th of July, and it's a bit earlier than usual because usually it's the afternoon, but it's at 11 a.m. this year. So it's a bit more in line with other leagues in that we get most of the day to pour over the fixtures rather than, having to wait until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The season itself starts on Saturday, the 8th of August. The finishing date is, I think, the same weekend pretty much as this season. I believe it's the 24th of April, which is the Saturday. And the playoff final, hopefully, Pools won't need to worry about that, of course, because we'll have won the league by that point. But I believe that that one is around about the 8th or the 9th of May that weekend as well. So, you know, it's always something to look forward to, a fixture release day. I think it's something that fans of any league pretty much have in common because, of course, it happens to everyone. And it's always fun, particularly in this division, because there are certain dates where you know you're going to get certain teams. By that, I mean, obviously, Boxing Day, New Year's Day, it's usually quite local. Good Friday and Easter Monday is around the same. So it's which one would you prefer if you had a choice of sort of teams for the opening day, for the final day, for Boxing Day and such? Would you have any particular preference? Would you prefer one perhaps near yourself down south, like Worthing, for example, get it out of the way?
Well, I mean, the last couple of years they've played Yeovil away on the opening day of the season, haven't they? And neither of those
Patrick,
games has
Patrick.
really been classic. I think you want a winnable home game to start the season. I think really all supporters want to see their side play at home on the opening day of the season. Obviously, the Boxing Day and the New Year's Day fixtures geography dictates that a little bit in terms of how the National League tend to do things. It goes without saying you've got to play every team at home and away at some point in the season, but I think there are better times to play certain sides. I would like to see Pools begin the season with a home fixture. As we've already discussed, you would imagine that Victoria Park, given the progress that the club are making in terms of their transfers, but also in terms of so many things that they're doing under Landon Smith, you would imagine that it's going to be a rocking atmosphere. You think back to when Pools returned to the Football League under Dave Challoner, the opening day of the season. They had a home game. Gavin Holohan scored that late winner, and the place was absolutely bouncing. You would love to see if Pools can create something similar to that. And I think it looks like, relatively speaking, a wide open National League. I mean, we might talk about it in a little bit more detail later. I think Carlisle are probably the outstanding contenders, but you look at the fact that York and Rochdale have gone out the league. Boreham Wood and Scunthorpe are both going to have to go some, I think, to recover from some high profile departures to their playing squads. Southend have taken a bit of a risk in replacing Kevin Mayer with Kieran Dyer. By all accounts, he's a really good coach, speaks very, very well, but Kevin Mayer has done really, really well with them. Forest Green Rovers a bit of an unknown entity because of their slightly scattergun approach to recruitment, but Pools will feel as though it's potentially a wide open division for them. I would always say that you would want a team that you would imagine would finish in the bottom half of the table at home on the opening day. You probably want to avoid the newly promoted teams because they would, you would think, would have a little bit of extra energy and enthusiasm on the first day of the campaign. And you certainly want to avoid a third successive trip to Yeovil on the opening day of the season too.
We'll just make it a tradition if that happens, and we'll play Yeovil on every opening weekend for the rest of time. If we get promoted this season, we'll just automatically promote Yeovil as well, so just so that we can play them on the opening weekend. It does seem like a tradition at this point. I still remember Jack Hunter's goal. I think it was the
Yes,
winner
indeed.
two
Yeah.
seasons ago when he first came to the club. It's
His
a
only
shame.
Pools goal, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame, of course, that he got injured that season because I think he started pretty well, and unfortunately, he had that. I think it kept him out for about 4 months or something or other, as part of our ridiculous injury record that season, in which Mancini, of course, went down in that bank holiday. Because I said earlier on about the bank holiday Monday in August, it very rarely lets us down for terrible fortune, if you like. But looking at the National League as a whole, as you said, it does seem more open than usual. I think the fact that York and Rochdale have both went up is a huge positive in the fact that neither of them are here to try and buy their way out of the league again, for want of a better thing. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that because if you've got the money to do it, you're quite entitled to do
Yeah.
that. There's no harm and no shame in doing that by any means. So I'll never criticize anyone for that. But it's good that they're not because it means that you've still got the big teams in the league. You've got the likes of Carlisle who'll have money behind them. Scunthorpe, I think, have a decent amount. Southend, you've mentioned as well, etc. Barrow and Harrogate, I know they're not the biggest teams necessarily, but having just come down from League Two, you'll expect them to push hard to try and make that instant return. So there's plenty of interesting subplots there. I think if you're looking at the current crop of managers, you mentioned a couple of them already. There is quite a few whereby they are former players and quite recent former players. You've got the likes of Kieran Dyer that you've mentioned already. Obviously, Lee Clark is a former player, particularly in this region. You've got Jermaine Defoe, who's currently at Woking as well, which I will be completely honest, I forgot about until Soccer Aid was on. No, I mean, I didn't watch Soccer Aid that much, but obviously Jermaine Defoe always seems to score at least twice every Soccer Aid every year. So it popped up on my thing and it said, he's in management. And I thought, oh yeah, he is, isn't he? Which was a bit of a bizarre one there. But there's been quite a few in the off season as well. Obviously, Pools have, from that perspective. But there's been quite a few teams that have ended their managerial reigns. There's been quite a few that have moved on. For example, you look at Kidderminster, Adam Murray going to Barrow, which was, I mean, it's the same division, so he may well be able to get a tune out of Barrow. And then Adam Lakeland was the weird one. I mean, I know Morecambe will have a lot of money for that division, but Halifax were a very good side last season. Hopefully, without their striker this season. Fingers crossed. I know there's been quite a few rumours about that. On that subject, what have you heard particularly about Will Harris? Is there anything? I know we've heard from the likes of Rob Law that it is something that the club are seriously looking at, but how much do you rate the chances of that actually happening?
I hope I'm not made to eat my words here, Jack. I really think that that's a deal that Pools have got a great chance of getting done. I think there might well be interest from some of the biggest clubs in the National League. There might well be interest from some clubs in the Football League, and that is potentially something that could make a difference if a club from higher up the pyramid were to come in and try and scupper any deal. I think pools are working very, very hard. When we spoke to Chris Beach and Chris Maxwell today, they told us that there were a number of deals that were very close or just waiting on medical. I think at least one deal is already completed and just yet to be announced. Harris was born in South Shields, and the understanding is he is very keen on a move back to the Northeast. That could be really significant. I think Hartlepool United, you can imagine what they're telling him. We want you to be the man to come and score the goals and fire us back to the Football League. You're going to be guaranteed to start every week. You're going to be able to work alongside and learn from a really experienced striker in Jordan Hugill, who's going to be there to help you develop, to be a teammate, but also a tutor in a sense. Hartlepool United this summer are very, very ambitious, and I think they have a really competitive budget. I think there's a lot to like about the possibility of Pools completing this deal. Look, nothing is ever guaranteed or certain in football. Harris, I think, given the fact that he's at a perfect age, really 25, the fact that he'd scored so many goals for Halifax last season was so impressive. The fact that he can do so much as a striker, he's not just a sort of archetypal number nine, although he is big and powerful, but he's dynamic and he's athletic. He's like Manny Disarue in that sense. Halifax, by all accounts, have been reluctant to sell to a club they consider to be a rival. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that they have triggered a clause in his contract in order to extend his stay in West Yorkshire for another season. Now, if that is the case, and I believe it is, were the Pools were prepared, willing, or able to pay a fee, which you would imagine would have to be the case, that remains to be seen. From my understanding, it's a deal that Pools are very, very keen on. I asked Chris Beach the question today, and he said, yes, we are very keen on good players. Will Harris is certainly one of those, and it would be a real marquee signing. It would be a real statement of intent. Pools fended off plenty of competition to sign Jack Nolan. And Harris, if he is under contract, it might be slightly different. Halifax, of course, determined to keep hold of him. John McGrath, the new Halifax boss, told the press last week that he was hopeful of keeping hold of Harris. Of course, in situations like that, you are almost inevitably going to say something along those lines until he is not your player. I would love to see Will Harris as a Pools player next season. Of course, he was on trial in 2022, wasn't he, at the time? Pools decided not to offer him a contract, but he's grown and developed a lot since then. Would be a real marquee signing. I genuinely get the sense that Pools are capable of completing this deal. Just from speaking to certain people at the club, I know how hard they are pushing. I know they're pulling out all the stops. I know they pulled out all the stops to sign Jack Nolan as well. I think the budget potentially is there. The ambition is there. Pools have got a plan. They've got a clear vision of what they want to do, how they want to grow the team on and off the pitch, how they want to succeed, not just next season, but for the years to come as well. And I think Will Harris could be a big part of that. Still maybe a little bit of work to do, but we'll be keeping everything crossed.
100%. I think if that gets pulled off, you've got Will Harris with Jordan Hugill coming off the bench and potentially playing alongside him at times. You've got the likes of Jack Nolan coming in from the wing, Brooklyn Alunga. You've got Corey McKeown in midfield. I've probably missed one of them, but there's a lot of options there. Jamie Miley, obviously already here. Nathan Sherrin base, anchoring the midfield, I should say. It's certainly the start of a very good squad. If they can add to it from this point onwards and continue the level of quality that it looks as though they've brought in, then we could be in for a very good season. And on that note, I think it's only best to mention your new venture, which is the Monkey's Uncle. It feels a little bit, you know, it doesn't feel right to bring it on without at least giving it a mention. So, given the unfortunate redundancy or at the end of the season, I should say, how did that come about in terms of, did someone approach you with that? I believe it was Counterpress, wasn't it? The production behind that. So did they approach you? Did you find that? And how did that come about? Did it come about quite quickly?
It did come about quite quickly, Jack, which was great. I mean, as a lot of people will know, I spent 8 months banned from Victoria Park under the former owner. And so it felt to me, when I had the unfortunate news about the redundancy at the Hartlepool Mail, it felt to me like I had unfinished business when it comes to covering pools. I mean, this is my club. It's the club I've supported all my life. Despite my southern accent, it's a club that I hold incredibly dear. I've lived in the town for a couple of years as well. It's a place I love. I love the people. I love the sense of community. I love the passion of the fan base as well. So I was desperate to get back in if that was at all possible. Counterpress contacted me pretty quickly after I took to social media to announce the redundancy. I mean, they've been absolutely amazing to work with so far. Sam, the founder, was actually in a similar situation to me a few years ago. He covered Swindon Town for a regional publication, found himself being made redundant, but set up his own website to cover Swindon Town, the club that he has followed and supported, and things grew from there. It's a really exciting and fast growing network. Counterpress have launched a whole host of new titles over the summer, but they've also got some really well established ones. They cover all sorts of sports, but they specialize in football from the Premier League right through to the National League. They cover some leagues in Europe as well. They do a lot of work in cricket, county cricket in particular as well. They're covering the England national team at the World Cup this summer too. After a couple of conversations, I think it was pretty clear that my ethos and my values were really similarly aligned, and we decided that we wanted to work together to create a website, to create a new way of covering Hartlepool United. We spent a couple of months discussing, planning, and designing how we wanted the website to look, how we wanted it to work, and what felt important to us in terms of covering Hartlepool United. I mean, there's never a dull day when it comes to covering pools. There's so much to talk about, so much to write about, so many exciting people to speak to as well. But the thing that makes this really feel like the right move for me it is the fact that there's a real scope for me to put my own stamp on it. I want to cover the stories that I feel are important to Hartlepool United and to Hartlepool United fans, and I have the freedom to do that, and that has been really exciting. We've had some really interesting interviews on the website as well. There's going to be loads from Chris Beach and Chris Maxwell coming up, and a few exciting interviews planned in the off season too before the campaign kicks off in August. So delighted to be getting going with that. Also delighted with the response we've had from Hartlepool United fans, both in terms of people who have decided to become a member, but also people who have reached out and got in touch to offer their support, offer their congratulations. I mean, the support and backing of the Hartlepool United fan base is never in doubt, and really it never ceases to amaze me. But even then, I've been surprised in a way by the support and the backing that we've had from the Hartlepool United community. And I hope it's going to be a really exciting new chapter, both in my own professional life, but also in the life of Hartlepool United as well, because we are on the cusp of what we all like to think is going to be a really exciting and successful season. And I'm delighted to be back and have the chance to cover pools once again.
100%. And if you want to subscribe to Robbie's new publication, the links are on social media, and I believe the publication also has its own social media print
That's
as
right.
well,
Yeah.
so you can follow those as well. Robbie, thank you very much for the catch up, and
Thanks, Jack.
hopefully we have some more news. And to be fair, if we announce Will Harris tomorrow, quite a bit of this podcast is going to become out of date very, very quickly. But for any Halifax fans who are listening, we are not saying we've signed him. We don't know for sure. We're just saying, we'd like to think that it might happen. But on a wider note, it's been good so far in the off season, and hopefully things will carry on into the season itself, and we can have a successful season ahead. Thank you very much, Robbie.
Thanks, Jack.